I'm good there. Okay.
Hey everyone, it's Kelleen, the Preparedness Pro, and I have got an amazing guest for you today. I keep finding these great people, and Rob Chadwick is one of them, and I'm excited that you get to hear from him today. He is the Director of Training and Education with the USCCA. That's uscca.com, by the way. And the reason why I tell you that is because there's over 1,500 classes, live classes you go to. You meet other people that are like-minded. You get to ask questions directly with a real live human being instructor. And there's over 1,500 going on throughout the U.S. just in the next month, folks. So we're going to talk to a very accomplished man today in the form of Rob. I hope you don't mind the accolades, Rob, but I just think what you guys do at the USCCA is wonderful.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
Well, so Rob, you've had a very impressive 20-plus year career with the FBI, including roles as a leader at Quantico. I hope we all know what Quantico is, listeners. If you don't look it up, it's impressive. SWAT was most of your career. You also were an agent in charge of the protective detail for the U.S. Attorney General. So I'm just a people person, and I would love to know if you could share with us what drew you into this type of career in law enforcement. How have those experiences prepared you for your current role at USCCA? If you could answer both those questions, that would be wonderful.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to do so. It was absolutely a blessing to have the opportunity to do what I did. I spent 30 years in law enforcement, started off as a police officer where I grew up in Northern Virginia, Fairfax County, and then had the opportunity to go with the FBI. My uncle had been an FBI agent, and several older male role models in my life had, influenced me quite a bit. And I have many family members who are still on the job in law enforcement, and was just drawn to it from an early age. And again, had the good fortune, the good health to be able to get into the FBI and just, serve my country in a way that I felt like I was continuing to serve my communities as well.
Well, you're certainly one of the ones that, one of the types, I should say, that President-elect Trump is referring to when he talks about the men and women, the boots on the ground in the FBI, being stalwart individuals. So how did those experiences prepare you for your current role at USCCA? I would love to hear about that transition.
Well, one of the tremendous blessings I had as an agent, had an incredible opportunity for so much training all over the world. My final assignment, as you mentioned, was at Quantico. I was the unit chief of our tactical training unit. So our job was to prepare our agents and our personnel all over the world for literally anything the job threw at them, to make sure that they come home at the end of the day. And so I, as a function of that job, I got to train with some really amazing people and units all over the world. And, I had some experiences, which I think we'll talk about later in the show, that really convinced me that I didn't want to stop doing what I was doing just because I was separating from government service. So yeah, just the incredible experiences and training and perspective that I felt was almost unique, really almost compelled me to keep doing what I was loving doing.
Well, you were helping the law enforcement officers themselves to do their jobs and to do their jobs well and still stay safe and stay within the confines of the Constitution that we know and love. And then you decided to take a path that you were benefiting the civilians in the world. What struck you to do that?
So one of the most significant moments in my career, fairly late in my career, I was at the time I was assigned to the Columbia Division in South Carolina of the FBI. I was on the SWAT team there, and my team responded to the church shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, where the 9 people were killed, murdered in the basement of their own church. And so my SWAT team responded to that event, and the crime scene there really struck me just so powerfully as I looked at the victims. And please understand that I am not being critical at all of those victims. They were exactly where they were supposed to be, doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. They actually welcomed this monster into their midst, and he sat with them for an hour during a Bible study. And at the end, he stood up and shot 9 of them, killed them where they sat. And the reason I mentioned this case, that more so than any other, really hit home for me that without preparation, without really understanding that this could happen and that you, the individual, must do something in a critical situation, or you will be overcome by events, as we've seen not only in Charleston, but in literally hundreds of others of these situations. I wanted to really spread that word, honor those victims and the victims of other tragedies. Listen, we cannot preclude these attacks from happening. We can't preclude, bad things from happening all over the place. But what we can do is prepare our fellow citizens, help them understand truly what is happening in their world, and help them understand that they must become a stakeholder in their own safety and security, because the world has changed tremendously. And there's so much you can do to drastically even the odds, or give yourself a much better chance of achieving a positive outcome during a crisis.
Well, I think you're uniquely qualified because of that perspective, because of what you've seen happen as a result of a lack of, as a result of abdicating one's security to others. And also as a result of having trained on the other side, you're uniquely qualified to help people know just how easy they can get in trouble doing some of the simplest things like defending themselves. And that's one of the things that struck me the most when I attended one of your classes. I've attended several, just so you know, in my local community. But is here you are minding your own business, and then you have the unfortunate event of having to defend yourself. And but then there's a ripple effect. And if you don't defend yourself and acknowledge the ripple effect, then you can still end up in hot water, which is what the USCCA is all about, is making sure that people have the skills to defend themselves, as well as understanding the ripple effect after that. And that's one of the things that I love about your message that you guys put out there.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's so critical for people to understand. You're always need to be your own first line of defense, because, the police have never been omnipresent, right? Omniscient, just they can't be everywhere all the time. And so no matter where you are, who you are, where you live, if trouble finds you, and it can find you anywhere, anytime, any place, you must understand that you're going to be on your own for at least some amount of time before help arrives, before the police can get there, before the sheriff's deputy can arrive. And the thing that I think is most undervalued or underappreciated is just how significantly our world has changed in the wake of the defund the police movement. I'm not going to be political at all.
Yeah.
I'll give you the Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am. The fact is that in the wake of the defund the police movement, response times for law enforcement on average in the United States have doubled. So you pick up the phone, call 911. It is taking the first law enforcement officer double the amount of time to get to you than it was just 3 years ago. And so that applies to everyone across the political spectrum, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Understand that if your plan is to call 911 and wait for the police to arrive, it's going to take at least twice as long. And, the average violent attack begins and ends in about 7 seconds. So even if there were a policeman down the street from you, they couldn't keep you safe all the time. So you must acknowledge things have changed. You must acknowledge that you have to be a stakeholder in your own safety and security. And that's why I feel it's so important for the USCCA to be here. I believe as the head of training, my mission is to help our fellow citizens understand what they can do to be a responsibly armed citizen to protect themselves. And we'll talk about, gun ownership and my views on that if you want to a little bit later.
Well, certainly. I'd love to get your perspective on that. Let's talk a little bit about understanding some self-defense laws, since we're there. Because many of our listeners are mindful of protecting themselves and their families, but they might not fully understand the laws surrounding self-defense. And that was the big wake-up call for me when I attended your classes. Can you share how self-defense laws vary and why it's critical to be well-informed about them?
Well, I'll start with the old adage, and it's not just an adage, it's true. Ignorance is never a valid defense, right? Ignorance of the law, right? So you must know the law. And here's the thing. So my home state of Virginia is a prime example, the classic purple state, right? So you could be involved in exactly the same situation in southwestern Virginia, where I went to school. I was a Virginia Tech grad, and pretty deep red part of the state, and it's a very conservative. It's still the same Commonwealth of Virginia, right? The law, the law is the same. However, the local law and politics are vastly different there than they are, say, in Northern Virginia, which is a deep blue part of that state. So even within your state, it could come down to almost the zip code that you live in, depending on who that person is that is deciding, are we going to prosecute, are we going to investigate, or that sort of thing. It's important to understand anytime you get into what I call a kinetic exchange with another person, whether you hit them, whether you shoot them, peppers, whatever it is to defend yourself, even if it's the most legally defensible, righteous, use of force, you're still going to be investigated by the police. It is their duty to investigate and determine what happened, fact find. But many times politics enter those determinations, or those motivations, I should say. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a politically minded, especially someone who is violently or adamantly against, use of firearms, or someone defending themselves, you could find yourself being prosecuted for something that the vast majority of your fellow citizens would find perfectly normal. Again, it's that our entire system of criminal justice is based on the reasonable man. And I would argue, and here we are late in 2024. Good luck defining for me what a reasonable American is that everyone would agree on, right? So it's important for people to understand that, yes, you must know the law, but you also have to understand that you are going to go through some type of almost certainly criminal investigation, possibly prosecution. And then there's the whole civil side of it as well.
Well, that's interesting you bring that up. One of the instructors made a very good point, because I remember it. So, I'm getting older and I forget things sometimes. So the fact that I remember it, he says, how many of you have driven on the freeway? Okay. And how many of you have seen idiots driving on the freeway? There you go. There's your peers of 12 people who are going to judge you. And you're right, because you don't, that's a toss up of whether or not you get that reasonable man or not, who's going to judge that your actions were reasonable. Now, this is not to say, folks, that we shouldn't be defending ourselves because we're afraid. We need to defend ourselves first and foremost. But there's a way. That's why I had Rob come on here. There's a way for us to defend ourselves in the aftermath as well. And those classes are valuable. They teach you what to say, what not to say, more importantly. What's one of the key illegal impacts of saying, I just shot someone?
Well, so it's very, very important to understand, as an American citizen, you have your constitutionally guaranteed rights, and the Fifth Amendment guarantees your right to not self-incriminate. Right? You cannot be compelled to give evidence that would tend to incriminate you. So, but as a former police officer, as a former FBI agent, as someone who dearly and deeply loves and admires and respects and supports law enforcement, I will tell you, their job is to investigate the crime and to gather as much information as they can. Many, many people feel, especially good people, in which I'm sure most of your listeners are, they have a conscience. They feel like they should cooperate and provide information to the police without a lawyer present. And I can tell you that is a terrible idea. Okay. Let's put it this way. If this goes to court, it's going to be an exchange of lawyers. And what do lawyers love? Their stock in trade is words. Okay. And the more words you provide that prosecuting attorney to pick apart and to rephrase and to take out of context, the greater the opportunity is for tragedy for you in the courtroom. So understand, you have an absolute right, and it is nothing wrong with accepting that right and saying, listen, this is what happened. And we prep our members. We when you join the USCCA, you get a card and you get access to a 24/7 crisis response team that will help walk you through exactly what to say, exactly what not to say, and why legally. And so, when a crisis happens, by definition, you're not at your best. You're not thinking clearly. You've had this dump of, adrenaline among other many chemicals. So you're not very focused. And so legally, your best defense is to remain silent. It is absolutely lawful and probably your best course of action until you have a professional representative who is your attorney, which of course the USCCA would provide, but this goes for anybody, non-members. If you get into a situation, wait for your attorney to be there. They are professionally trained to help you navigate this process is all it is. And so, that just guilty almost, and I use that term, loosely, but this guilty compulsion to explain away, keep it very short, very brief. I would like my attorney present before I say anything else.
What about that 911 call, though? Because a lot of people don't realize that 911 call is recording even while it's ringing.
Oh, the instant you connect to 911, it's recording, right? So before the operator picks up, if you're talking off mic or whatever to whomever, it's picking up not only what you're saying, but everything that's happening around you. Most of your listeners will have a cell phone or a smartphone. Those microphones are incredibly sensitive and can pick up all kinds of things. So understand the minute or the moment, I should say, that you make that 911 call, it's being recorded for posterity and can be, again, taken out of context. So understand that everything, we live in what I call a ubiquitous technical surveillance state, right? So you're being recorded by your phone. You're probably being recorded by your car. You're being recorded by your neighbors and your own Ring doorbells, street light. I mean, everywhere we go and everything we do, including our smartwatches, everything's being recorded. And so they will have access to that in many cases. So understand that it's incredibly important to remain silent as much as you can. You're not doing anything wrong. This is your constitutionally guaranteed right as an American to remain silent, wait for your attorney, absolutely cooperate with law enforcement, but that doesn't mean to offer or proffer more information until your attorney arrives. Help them make the scene safe, cooperate fully with whatever they're instructing you to do, except for making a statement.
Yeah. So we're in the world of liability insurance now, is essentially what we're talking about. And a lot of gun owners just don't think about that. They think about, yeehaw, here's my Second Amendment right. I'm going to exercise it if necessary. They've thought about it enough that if the occasion arises, they do exercise it. But there are risks if people don't have something as simple as liability insurance. What are so critical about having liability insurance for responsible gun owners? What risks do they take if they don't have it?
Well, so it starts with, again, understanding, what you have working for you already, right? Most people that I've talked to over the years, and it's been a considerable number of people, including law enforcement officers, assume, usually incorrectly, that their homeowner's policy or their umbrella policy will cover them for an act of violence, right? So almost universally, that's not the case. Okay, so any intentional act is excluded, generally speaking. So most homeowners insurance policies will not cover you for an intentional act. So, intentionally defending yourself using force in any way. So generally speaking, that policy is not going to be in effect at all. What you need to understand is that anything you do to contribute to that situation. So let's say you're riding down the road and there's a road rage incident and you issue the universal, single digit salute and escalate that situation. That could nullify your self-defense claim, right? Your ability to claim self-defense in court, which would really significantly hurt your standing as well. But, in terms of liability insurance, unless you have a dedicated self-defense liability insurance policy, and of course, one of the main benefits of the USCCA is our policy. As soon as you join, like the instant you join, you are covered by what I truly believe is the industry-leading SDLI policy. Now, I would encourage your listeners, though, don't take my word for it. Do your homework. There are plenty of other companies out there that have good policies. There's always pluses or minuses for every, there's healthy competition in America, right? So,
Sure.
There are policies out there, but I say any person who would even consider using force, and it doesn't have to be a gun, okay? Any person who would consider using force to defend themselves, a bat, a golf club, pepper spray, a car, a fist, whatever it is, if you have this kinetic exchange with another human being, it's almost certainly going to result in criminal investigation, possibly prosecution, and then almost certainly civil liability. Okay. So even if you're found innocent in a criminal court, they're probably going to go after you civilly for money. And so you want to have both of those, which of course the USCCA does offer. Again, it's all available on our website. Do your homework. Don't take my word for it, but please find something out there that suits your needs, and research it, because again, once it's happened, it's too late to get the policy, right? Like
Right.
It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, right?
Well, let's give some context to this, because I heard plenty of scenarios in the class that were helpful to remember. In one instance, there was a man who was out on bail for a heinous crime. Shouldn't have been out on bail in the first place, and immediately went and attacked someone. He was killed in the process, and his surviving mother sued civilly. She was actually victorious because of how the self-defense went down. She was actually victorious in making the victim pay for the children, like child support, until they turned 18. I think that's what happens when you have improper representation, inadequate representation, I should say. Share with us some scenarios that help to enlighten us a little bit about what can happen.
So there may be many of your listeners there who maybe can never envision themselves, using a gun. All right. So to defend themselves or others. Fine. I'm going to talk to you about a situation that happened relatively recently. This man just came up to headquarters. I met with him, and an incredible story that I think anyone could put themselves in this guy's shoes. So he's home in a suburban neighborhood. His brother and son are across the street doing some yard work for a neighbor and cutting the grass. And he hears this commotion. Now, the neighbor adjacent to the yard that they were cutting has a chain link fence, and behind this chain link fence is this pit bull dog, like a really nasty, I love dogs, don't get me wrong, most pit bulls are great. This one had been raised to be aggressive and vicious, and so this other neighbor thought it was very funny to let the dog out into the backyard, who would then run up and down the fence, just snapping and barking and growling. And as this, I think he was 11 or 12 years old, kid is pushing the lawnmower in the other yard. Well, so you got uncle and son across the street doing yard work, and all of a sudden this dog gets under the fence. And now there's nothing but, yeah. And so the dad comes out, our member, USCCA member, comes out and sees this vicious pit bull who is being held at bay with a lawnmower and a weed whacker. That's it. And the owner of the dog is standing on his stoop laughing about this. Okay. Now the dad, the member, has his, retrieves his weapon, goes outside, says, "Hey, get this dog away from, my family. Control your dog. I'm going to have to shoot him. All right, if you don't." And eventually the neighbor gets his dog, goes back in the house. Well, believe it or not, several minutes later, the police show up to investigate, and our member is arrested because the dog owning neighbor calls the police, lets him know that, hey, this guy brandished, which he never did, brandished a firearm, told me he was going to, shoot my dog, shoot me. None of that ever happened. But our member was arrested, put in handcuffs, and taken down to the station. Luckily, again, his USCCA membership kicked in. We had representation. An attorney was there to meet him. But imagine this situation. Your son, your brother are literally, holding this vicious dog at bay with a weed eater. The neighbor is laughing about it, and then you get arrested because you threatened to potentially have to shoot this dog if he doesn't retrieve it. So stories like that. So we actually have a web page as part of our website, member testimonials. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of real world stories that we've put up there to help people understand really contextualize, right? Put themselves in the shoes of their fellow Americans who have been through this process. Some of these are absolutely heartbreaking, which is, why I'm so proud to be part of this, because I was on the other side of the fence. I was a law enforcement officer. Of course, I'm not trying to be negative against law enforcement, but a lot of times they don't have all the facts. They don't know what happened, right? They're only taking what they can gather from everyone there, and everyone's story is going to be different. So, you can't rely on, well, this is what happened. Well, again, it may not be what the facts bear out or what the investigation bears out. It might be a different story. So you got to have, again, professional representation. You have to have a team on your side, starting with that initial phone call. So as a member of the USCCA, you have access to our critical response team. Literally, you call it up and there's a professionally trained crisis counselor to tell you what to do, what to say, how to behave, to help get you through the situation responsibly.
And that should be your second call, folks. Your first call should be 911. But yes, they are well trained. These aren't just hipsters sitting in their PJs, right. Playing video games until they get a call. What's the call volume like for them?
We get, I'll say it's a hot call fairly frequently. I mean, we have over 850,000 members currently in the United States. So you can imagine with crime on the rise, and trust me, crime is on the rise. Response times are doubled. So you're having a lot more people interacting, having to be their own first defender. So we get calls quite frequently, certainly several times a day. Some of them, of course, are more serious than others. But those that CRT, that crisis response team, are 24/7, 365, extremely well trained, very calm. It's almost like calling a 911 operator, but someone who's actually working for you.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting thing to point out. One of the things I learned in the class was the best thing that person who had the altercation with the dog, the best thing that they could have done was to have called 911 first.
That's right.
Because then they set the scene as opposed to the other guy who was clearly setting a bogus scene. Yeah, that's very interesting. So keep that in mind, folks. When you have a scenario, even if it seems benign, get on the phone to 911, get things on the record before somebody else gets their version. So beyond insurance, share what other resources the USCCA offers to its members to ensure that they are prepared for worst case scenarios.
Well, my job is head of education and training for the USCCA. And one of the things that I oversee is our Protector Academy, which is our digital repository for training. And so members have access, and actually non-members have limited access to the Protector Academy, and just sort of sample videos. But our full members have access to hundreds of hours of training, of legal seminars. We have a nationwide network of extremely experienced criminal defense attorneys who have recorded sessions of when can I brandish a firearm? When is it okay to do this? When is it okay to do that? What should I do in this situation? And these attorneys who have courtroom experience, proven successful courtroom experience, will give you their perspectives. And I can tell you, it's vastly different from what most people, including me, would pick up, from Hollywood or the media or that sort of thing. It's a whole different story when it's for all the marbles in real life. So, the online training is a huge part of it. We also offer when I say award-winning, it just won the best magazine in the country award. So the Concealed Carry magazine comes out, I think 8 or 9 times a year. And it's just packed full of stories, real life member stories. It also has gear reviews. It also has just tips and lifestyle for people who are concerned about how can they best become a true, competent, and confident stakeholder in their own security. Just a really, really well done magazine. Of course, that's part of your membership as well.
Yeah, there were a couple of members in my group, and they went on to say how shocked they were with the content and how quality that it is. And of course, the instructor was head over heels in love with it as well, that he could share its articles with other people in real life. It has application. It's not just fluff.
Right.
Certainly has application. So let's talk about this other scenario real quick. Just because I feel that it merits being part of the cluster of scenarios. There was a scenario that we were shared with in our class in which a woman used a pepper spray for self-defense. She obviously was absolved of any wrongdoing from a criminal standpoint, but the person was later able to come back on a civil aspect and prevail because the pepper spray was antiquated, because the pepper spray itself was antiquated. What do you have to say about that?
Again, an attorney, his job or her job is to represent their client and get the best outcome for them. So, the plaintiff in this situation, I'm not blaming the attorney, it's their job. And so they're going to go after any possible way to get, again, compensation for themselves and for their client. Of course, understand they're motivated to win because that's when they get paid. So it's important to understand that, in a courtroom, it's not necessarily what actually happened. It's the story that can be told, the narrative that could be spun by the opposing counsels. And these are professional wordsmiths, right? That's what they do. Mm-hmm. And so, in this particular situation, the pepper spray, I think, was it was either out of date or it was
2
too
years
high.
out of date.
Yeah, something like that, which should have actually made it less powerful. Right. But, that, again, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. And so, the court, again, it's important to understand the threshold is so much lower in a civil court, right, than it is in a criminal court. So you just have to have a, 51% and you win in civil court, right? So many, many times we've seen our members prevail in a criminal court, and you think, all right, well, that's it. Well, no, it's just getting started. Now the civil trial. Well, one of the great features of the USCCA, coverage is the civil liability is unmatched. It's not even close. And of course we pay for that as well, as in terms of like providing the attorney and then damages. It's just, like I said, do your research. Don't take my word for it. Look at the different competitors. And if you have any inclination of defending yourself in any situation, you really should have some type of self-defense liability insurance.
Let's talk about constitutional carry for a second, because it is becoming more prevalent in the U.S. But I was just talking to someone the other day in Arizona, and we got to talking a little bit about my background, and she proudly declared that, her state was constitutional carry. So she didn't worry about getting her concealed carry permit for when she went to Utah. She said, because Utah is a reciprocal state. Well, you and I both know that that's not how constitutional carry works. What should our listeners know about that? Well,
so the constitutional carry is several different, permitless carry, constitutional carry is in effect in well over half the states now. And I think it's a great thing. It is literally what the Constitution guarantees. Now, your right to keep and bear a firearm shall not be infringed. And I literally swore an oath to, die if need be to protect that right. But I will say this, while it's absolutely not a requirement to get trained well on the use of the firearm, just because you have the right to do it, great. Go out and have a firearm. I do believe it is the one true equalizer, mm-hmm. of extremely disparate, individuals involved in a conflict. If you have a firearm and you're well trained and well positioned, you can pretty well hold off just about anyone for an extended period of time. But in terms of the constitutional carry, I think people just think, well, I've got it now. I've got this weapon, this magic talisman is going to keep me safe because I have a gun. Well, unless you are very proficient, very comfortable with it, there's a very high likelihood that one, you're not going to do well, right? Under stress, your performance declines. Here's an interesting fact that I'll share with you that I think people really need to consider and put themselves in this shoes. So the FBI, where I came from, keeps statistics and has for 100 years now plus. One of the oldest running statistics that the FBI keeps track of is the law enforcement officer involved shootings. Okay, so an adversarial shooting, you got a bad guy, an FBI agent or a police officer or a sheriff's deputy, doesn't matter. For 80 plus years, this statistic is held true, just within 1 or 2 percentage points either way each year. And this is a law enforcement officer gets into an adversarial shooting with a bad guy. That distance is on average between 7 to 10 feet, so very close proximity. Right. And this is a trained law enforcement officer. Now, very varying levels of training, but trained law enforcement officer, 7 to 10 feet on average. Again, for the last 80 years, that law enforcement officer will miss 70 to 80% of the rounds they fire in that 7 to 10 foot exchange. All right. Yeah. So think about this. 7 to 8 of those 10 rounds are going into something or someone other than their intended target. All right. And so as a law enforcement officer, if it is a a righteous shoot, a good shoot, so to speak, okay, they're civilly and criminally exempt from prosecution, generally speaking. All right. As a private citizen, you have none of those protections. There is no Good Samaritan exemption for using a firearm in any state. You are absolutely criminally and civilly liable for every round you fire. All right. And so, it's important to understand that, yes, having the firearm is a very important first step, but becoming proficient, becoming confident and competent with it, understanding the limitations of it, understanding your liability. Just because your state or commonwealth has constitutional carry, that does not mean that all the rest of the laws and the probabilities go out the window. I highly, highly encourage people to get trained and then to keep up with your training, because firearms, just like every other skill, golfing, anything you do, if you don't do it for a while, you get rusty. Your skills slip. And so people need to whatever weapons platform they choose to defend themselves, you gotta train with it if you want to be good with it. And the time to hope that you're good with it is not when you're facing an existential threat.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I just recently posted an article in which one of the things I suggested that people do is to do some squats before they shoot at their target, get their heart rate up and going, and see how their aim is impacted by that.
Yeah, that's something we would do, obviously, at Quantico, and I traveled the world training law enforcement officers. We would put them in their kit, heavy vest, and run them around, get their heart rate up, and then try to actually have a moving target, because I can assure you that if the person's not going to stand still like a piece of paper on the range. So it's very, very difficult to shoot someone. It just is. And the thought that, well, I can stand here 5 yards from a static piece of paper, and that is realistic. It's good for trigger control, sight alignment. That's about it.
Let's talk about the other impact of that. Let's talk about the mental component. What are the most overlooked aspects of being truly prepared for a critical situation mentally?
Well, I like to operate on something I call a concept I call pre-made decisions, right? So you have to understand physiologically, psychologically, that and this is just human nature, again, to get to the very opening thing we talked about, what I saw in Charleston, what I've seen so many other times. If you are suddenly, unexpectedly faced with an existential threat, human nature is to do one of three things, right? Freeze, run, or flee, or fight. Generally, people will freeze. Your body will, unless you have thought about what you would do, one, ahead of time. It has to be ahead of time. It does you no good to think, well, I'll come up with a plan in the heat of the moment. That is certainly not going to happen. You must decide, all right, this could happen to me. It's unlikely. Yeah, statistics say it's unlikely, but it could happen. So now that I've accepted that this could happen, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to, if I'm at church, that's the exit. That's my primary exit. There's my secondary exit, tertiary exit, whatever it is. I've got a plan. I've thought about that. If I'm at my office, I'm sitting in my cubicle and I hear gunshots. What am I going to do instantly, even though no one else is doing anything? Because most people will freeze. We have a pack mentality. We also, all of us, our brains have this bias towards normalcy. Okay. It's important to understand that ahead of time, because your brain will try to trick you into thinking, that's probably a backfire. Maybe this is some kind of a drill. There's no way this is really happening, right? And so that hesitation is costing you precious seconds. The most important critical element of any crisis is time. And if you can steal back a second or two or three or five, so that pre-made decision, right? I've already decided what I'm going to do. I am going to do this no matter what. And I'll probably, it'll steal back time. It'll put me ahead of the curve, and maybe I'll influence others. Okay. I'll give you a very concrete example that I like to talk about. So let's say I'm at a gas station. All right. It's late at night and I'm not paying attention. I'm not even, listening to my own advice. And I'm standing there pumping my gas, and some guy comes out of the darkness with a knife and says, "Give me your keys and your wallet, or I'll kill you." Now, almost, as the director of training for the USCCA, I'm almost always armed. All right, 30 years in law enforcement, I have a lot of experience, very confident in my ability to protect myself. And it's a clear situation. This guy has threatened to kill me if I don't comply. So it's a very clear use of force. But I've already made the decision. All right, in that scenario, I'm gonna throw my keys one way, toss my wallet the other way, and I'm leaving in a third direction, right? Because the car can be replaced, the wallet can be replaced. I never had much cash in my wallet anyway. So, right, and all of it can be replaced, and I go on with my life a few days later as if nothing happened. Now, I know if I pull the gun and I shoot this person, it could very well be a justified use of force, but it's going to result in at least months, probably sometimes years of both criminal and or civil or both litigation, right? My life is inalterably changed. Now, people think, "Oh, that's crazy. Why would he do that?" Well, I know what the consequences are, and the car and the wallet are not that big a deal to me. Now, change that equation slightly. My wife's asleep in the car, or my grandson is buckled into the back seat. I've already made the decision. There's no way I'm going to let anybody near that car threatening, right? So I've decided what I'm going to do. I recall that I do have this plan, and I'm committed to act, right? Now I am dictating the action. I am much more likely to achieve that positive outcome. I've decided the consequences, all of this that would flash through your mind otherwise, it's already been decided. So I think people need to operate on, not all the time, but just have, in the back of their mind, this is what I'm going to do if I hear gunshots in the theater. This is what I'm going to do if someone tries to kick in my door in the middle of the night. I have the plan. I've already rehearsed it. I put some things in place that I'm ready to act on, and I commit to acting. Decisive action is what wins, critical situations, right? Otherwise, you will be overcome by events, and that's just a tragedy.
So, folks, that goes to the second principle of preparedness that we teach. Just for your benefit, Rob, we teach 10 principles of preparedness in order of prioritization. And the second principle is mental preparedness. So that mental fortitude, I'm sure you're familiar with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman.
Oh, I've met him many times.
Yeah, he will be on our show next week, so we're pretty excited about that. And for those of you who don't know, he's written 2 great books. I mean, he's written more than 2, but one is on combat and the other is called On Killing. And he talks about the psyche, the mental fortitude that's necessary for somebody to actually get themselves in a state of mind where they're willing to defend themselves. And that defense may be throwing your keys one way and a wallet another and then running. But it's got to be thought of beforehand. We had a situation here a few months ago in which a man was accosted at a gas station, just like you described, with a knife and the threat of 2 men. And he instinctively, and I say instinctively because obviously he had thought about this beforehand, he pulled the gas nozzle out of the tank and he sprayed them down. And that was enough to get them to flee. So it's just all about that mental fortitude, that preparation. It's vital. Well,
Yeah, that's right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, the old adage is your body cannot go where your mind hasn't been, right? So you must have thought about it ahead of time, or you absolutely will not, come up with the right solution or rise to the occasion. You will fall back on your training. You'll fall back on your preparation.
Yeah, we've got to give our hard drive something to work with. So even if that's watching movies and entertaining, what would I do if? The more physical practice that you can get, the more solidified your mental preparedness is. So like he's saying, folks, about the training and putting yourself in scenarios, the local classes that they offer really help with some of that mental fortitude as well. And not being afraid. That's the last thing we want to have happen with this interview, is having people afraid of defending themselves.
Right.
That can be taken care of course, with what the USCCA offers. Let's switch gears here a little bit. Your work at Quantico and as a protective detail leader, it's had to have taught you a lot about resilience and situational awareness. What are some key lessons from your time with the FBI that you think can directly apply to everyday preparedness?
So one of the biggest lessons that I like to share, for your listeners, understanding that the FBI provides a full-time protection detail for the Attorney General, who is the head of the Department of Justice, and the FBI Director. So we have two full-time protection details, sort of like the Secret Service does. And so, you've got lots of agents who are well armed, well trained, all former SWAT or active SWAT trained, armored vehicles, long guns, all the equipment, all the radios, everything you could possibly imagine to conduct the Attorney General or the Director safely wherever they go. And so the lesson I try to relate to the average everyday citizen is you should act like your family's protection detail. And here's what I mean by that, right? Very few of us have the luxury of having, a couple of armored, Suburbans with agents with long guns in the back and earpieces and all that. But the concepts and the principles remain the same. All that training, all those weapons and armor and preparation did not give us that sort of passport into dangerous situations. Okay. That's such a fallacy. Like, oh, we've got all this training. We've got this firepower. We can go anywhere we want. No. Our mentality was, if we had to draw our weapon, the mission had failed. Okay. It's that situational awareness, that decision-making, that, hey, something here doesn't look quite right. Something here is not exactly conducive to safety. So we're going to wave off. We're going to, choose to fight another day. We'll find an alternate entrance. We won't attend this event, whatever it is. And so, I think a lot of people have this terrible misconstrued idea that, well, I've got a concealed weapon, so I can cut down that dark alley, or I can go into that bad part of town because I've got a gun. That gun or that weapon should be your absolute last resort to get you and your family to safety. If you have failed in your situational awareness, or someone has caught you by surprise, or you didn't see something developing in time to have separated yourself from it. Again, time and then distance are your friends in any crisis. If you can see something developing ahead of time and put time and distance and barricades and everything else between you, that's what you want to do. And that's what a protection detail does all the time. You see the movies whether it's Clint Eastwood who's drawing his gun and shooting people. If that happens, you have failed, right? It's great entertainment for a movie, but any protection agent will tell you, if I've had, I never once had to draw my weapon in all of the hundreds of trips and, movements that we did, because we had such a detailed plan, great communication, people paying attention. If there were someone of interest that we would go up and shake their hand and, hey, how you, and with the entire time, of course, we're assessing their demeanor, their behavior. Are they presenting as someone who might be armed? And if there was any question whatsoever, we were communicating, hey, let's take the principal to which is the person we're protecting, another location or another route or wave off completely. So that weapon that you carry as a private citizen is your passport out of danger, not into it, right? That's the biggest fallacy is, hey, I'm armed, I can go anywhere. It's the last that is the mentality of someone who really doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah. And I think that's some great parting wisdom for our audience in helping their preparedness efforts, that situational awareness, understanding what the purpose is of being armed and ability to defend yourself, but never having to use it is obviously the best plan. Thank you so much. Before we go, I want to reiterate to folks the USCCA membership. You guys just do such a great work, and the benefits that you get with that membership are just exhausting. It's all inclusive. And I don't want anybody to think that it's some gargantuan cost, because it's actually very, very reasonable. There are several different levels. He keeps telling you to do your homework. I would suggest do your homework as well, but I'm just going to tell you, I've done my homework and I haven't found anything as comprehensive. So by all means, take a look. What I would suggest is you take one of their classes locally, which are always free. Take one of their classes locally, see what you think, get a feel for the organization. Like he said, there's over 1,500 classes scheduled all over the U.S. just in this next month, in spite of the holiday. So there's got to be something near you. I know I didn't have to drive more than 20 minutes to get to a class in all the cases. So I strongly recommend being better prepared. This liability insurance comes under financial preparedness, which is our 9th principle of preparedness. And the self-defense comes under physical preparedness, which is our 3rd principle of preparedness. So we're hitting all the bells and whistles here, folks. We've had a great guest in you today, Rob. Thank you so much for your expertise and for your passion of helping the civilians in the world to have not only the right to defend themselves, but the ability and the wherewithal to do so.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for what you're doing. I love this concept. I love what you guys are all about. And there's nothing more heartbreaking than seeing someone who is living in fear because of doubt or uncertainty in their ability to protect themselves. I saw that when my grandfather passed away. I was 16 years old, and I saw my grandmother, who lived by herself now. She was afraid, and it was just absolutely heartbreaking. And I don't want anyone to live in fear, and not in the United States. So, get some training, get some ability to protect yourself, get confident and competent in that. And life is so much more enjoyable. So that's what we're here for.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I still have another 10 questions I'd love to ask you. So maybe we'll just have to have you back again. Thank you so much, Rob. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.